Hello and welcome to the Confusion Wrestling Podcast, the last bastion of independent wrestling. I'm your host, Rob Kammer, and, well, what should we talk about today? Well, the first thing I think we should talk about, I know it's old news by this point, but in between the recording of this and last week's episode, world-class play-by-play man Bill Mercer passed away, 99 years young. The man lived an incredibly long life, very impressive in this day and age. But I just wanted to just kind of like share a brief thought, like I didn't really know what a Bill Mercer was until I was well into adulthood. I missed the halcyon days of world class, and being from Central Illinois, even if I was a bit older, there's not a good chance I probably would have realized too much about them anyway, because the high time of world class is around 83, 84 ish thereabouts, depending on what your opinions are of it, and I would have been like an infant at that point, or not born yet, but Mercer was for all practical purposes, the voice of world class, and often kind of a voice of reason in the wacky realm of professional wrestling. Just because, he didn't have a gimmick. He sounded professional. He was a professional. And then when you had guys, like Gino Hernandez, Gary Hart, who are all kind of like bombastic, or you got guys like Bruiser Brody and or Kamala, running around. You got to have an anchor for that. And Mercer did a darn fine job of that. And I just found out recently that he was on the front lines during the Kennedy assassination too, because he was a news anchor back in '63 in Dallas, and was right on the front lines during the assassination, and was the one who broke the news to Lee Harvey Oswald that he was getting arrested for being an assassin and whatnot. So really cool fact of the day on that one. But rest easy, sir. You deserve it. One voice, less in the world, unfortunately. Not good with this grief stuff, really. But so I guess we'll kind of move on to happier things. This episode is ultimately dedicated to, Olde Wrestling. We have Olde Wrestling founder, professional wrestler Marion Fontaine coming into the studio, and I can't stress enough that I make these. This is a backhanded compliment, but let's face it, the mere existence of this podcast is some weird backhanded compliment. But I don't. It's one of those. This is one of those interviews. I don't know if it made for great listening, but man, I had so much fun. And I hope it comes through and makes for good listening. But it was just so cool to have Marion on the show and talk Olde Wrestling, because it's Olde Wrestling. If you haven't checked it out, I have been able to check it out. It's really cool. It's a niche product, and I do love me some good niche products with their own little closet universes and whatnot. But it was really cool to talk about Olde Wrestling and kind of how the creative aspects of Olde Wrestling and where that came from, and then just throwing out there rando bits of history, which is also one of my hobbies as well. So it was super cool to have Marion in the studio, and I hope you guys enjoy this interview as much as I did sitting on the other side of the screen from him. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and cut to it. We're going to go to the adverts like we usually do, so get yourself some coffee, a coffee machine, some swag, and all that sort of good stuff, and we'll be back un momento with Marion Fontaine. Hey folks, MLW Confusion's become a veritable hub of shopping and treats and all that sort of good stuff. Whether you need a sugar-free alternative to energy drinks in the form of Raise Energy, or maybe even, top-of-the-line ice makers, coffee machines, and other household appliances, or, let's go crazy, and you can even get WWE licensed apparel, all through my links section. All you got to do is wander down to the descriptor of this week's episode, check out the various links, click on them, and go shopping like you normally would. Heck, it's no difference. You just came in and just said Rob sent you. And that way you can get the things you need, maybe even at a discount, and the podcast gets a kickback as well. So be sure to check out those links. Thank you very much for listening. Back to the show. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, the Confusion Wrestling Podcast. I'm Rob Kammer, and with me in the studio today, we have a special guest. He is the captain of 1920s action-packed extravaganzas. He is Marion Fontaine. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Rob, and I appreciate that introduction there. That's a first for me. I haven't been called the captain before, so I'm going to take it. I'm going to take that nautical theme and run with it.
Well, every good ship needs a captain, and I think we're going to consider Olde Wrestling a ship now. That's what it is.
I'll take it. An old yacht. I like that.
I could be just like, I mean, I could just I could have just gone like facial hair stuff. I did that for Irving West, or it's like the best mutton chops on the independent circuit.
There you go.
Irving West. And
there was, gosh, I don't know if I'm going to do myself any justice by remembering these, but I had a whole kind of list of nicknames that were mustache themed. And now I'm blanking on all of them because this would have been like 10 or 12 years ago. I'll think of them, but it would have been something like the S word of the stash, like any mustache nickname. It was like the captain of it, I think it might have been the captain of the cookie duster. So I was looking up, like nicknames for mustaches, and then some kind of high ranking official for that I could do with it. But I do remember it was like the captain or something of the cookie duster. So now I'm gonna have to go back in my files and remember what some of those other ones were, like the major of the mustache, But yeah, now you got me thinking. I'm gonna have to go in the archives and find those, because there was a whole list of them when the ref would, or the announcer would introduce me. It was like 5 or 6 of them.
and I should have been like, and this is where my memory fails me, because like usually I'm not gonna lie, like when some of the stuff, like I'll go to like Cage Match or like, it's not Internet Wrestling Database, but it's something that like it like puns itself off on IMDb, but it's just like wrestlers, but also steals all of its information from Cage Match usually. But like I just watched one of the old wrestling events from like 3 years ago, and it was something mustache related, but I blanked on it, and I didn't write anything down because I'm a terrible host, and like I probably just figured like, oh, I don't need to go back to this. Cage Match will give me a good introduction.
Right.
It failed me for once. Cage Match, get on it. That's the nature of the beast. If I was thoroughly prepared, I'd have like a whole flip book of your old nicknames, and a whole batch of maybe match listings before we even talk about before we go into Old Wrestling, where I'll have like all the cards listed up. And
you wrestled this person on this date, this was the attendance, I heard this was the gate. None of that today, but that's okay. We don't need, who cares about those details, right?
We'll leave that to Conrad and his info guy. But the jokes about this aside, I do like to start off everything with the super original, never before asked question of what got you into the realm of professional wrestling. What started your fandom?
Well, what's interesting is that like it's just been a part of my life for pretty much as long as I can remember. So I don't know, the earliest memory that I can recall was Easter, whenever the Jake the Snake Hasbro figure was out, and I don't know how long, or I know, whenever that was, 90, 91 or something like that, or 89. So I can't remember when the Hasbro figures were out. But anyway, somewhere around that time frame, I got one for Easter, and I just thought it was the coolest action figure. And at that time, I think I maybe just had your typical Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, maybe some other action figures thrown in there. And I think that was the introduction to wrestling for me. It was like, maybe I saw it at a toy store and thought it was really cool. Someone got the Easter Bunny, got it for me for Easter, and he knew. And I remember, before I even had, because I only had that one figure, I had a Rock'em Sock'em TMNT version, and it had a ring base around it. And before I had like the Hasbro ring, and I only had maybe Jake the Snake and like, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger is like T2 or something. I would wrestle around the two. Like I think it was Shredder and maybe think Raphael. I would like have to do my matches around these two big Rock'em Sock'em figures. And from there, I mean, it's just always been a part of my life since then. I guess I've probably been about 5 years old. And then it's just always been a part of my life ever since then. I mean, I watched it growing up, would go to WWF shows when I was young, start to go to independent shows probably when I was around 10 years old here and there in North Central Ohio. And then backyard wrestled for a long time and started training in 2000 and I think 3, and then I've been doing it semi-professionally. I always like to throw a semi in there. Semi-professionally ever since to take us to here. So yeah, it's just always been a part of me in some form or fashion.
Wow. I'm just gonna throw out there like Jake the Snake was one of the few of those Hasbro's like I didn't get. Like I had like most of the line of them,
Mhm.
and he was just one. Like I can't think of a reason now why I wouldn't have it outside of just parents not having the money for it,
Yeah.
and like and then in my hierarchy of things, probably well, especially after Jake the Snake sick to the Viper on Savage, like that took him way
Right.
down on my list because that traumatized me as a child.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and to this day, I'm trying to remember if I still have that original one because I did sell a lot of my figures over the years. When I saw that the market was like, people were really trying to get them, I was like, okay, let me try and cash in on some of these Hasbro's I got. Um, but I still kept the Jake the Snake one. Now, if I remember correctly, it's stored away somewhere. I don't think it's the original Snake. I think I ended up getting a newer one because mine was like pretty faded. But that original toy, I still should have. So, which is cool little story to tie it all together. My fandom.
Oh, of
Yeah.
course. I also like asking, what made you take the leap from just fan to, well, in
Mhm.
your case, semi pro
Yeah.
professional wrestler.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, me and my buddies, we started backyard wrestling in like 7th grade, me and my best friend. I mean, like I said, at that time when I was in like 5th or 6th grade, somewhere around there, that's like 95, 96. And wrestling wasn't really cool at school. Like it just wasn't. Like I felt like I was kind of a closeted wrestling fan. I didn't really talk to many kids in my school about it. It was more like kids were, rather play football than like talk about what happened on Superstars or whatever. And then kind of the NWO happened. And that's when my friend that I'd known forever, he started getting into wrestling, really into it. And so we started the backyard wrestle and we did that for a number of years. We did it during the time of the best of backyard wrestling tapes. If you know
Hmm.
those, when those came out, like the late 90s,
Yeah,
98 or
really.
something, 97. Yeah, somewhere
I
around.
have one of the games
Oh,
actually.
do you have? Yeah, so like M Dog and Josh Prohibition are on there. They were kind of the faces of it. And those were really popular. And like those people, like if you know Josh and Matt, like their story, like they were on Oprah, there were other people on like Jenny Jones because these kids, the Attitude Era was so popular. Teenagers were mimicking it and they were going to the extreme. They were jumping off roofs or they were, like lighting tables on fire like the Dudleys, yada, yada, yada. And I remember there was a news station, a TV channel from Toledo, because where I grew up was pretty much smack dab in between Toledo and Cleveland. And so I don't know how they got a hold of us, but a news crew got a hold of us and they were like, hey, we want to come down and see your guys' operation. Assuming that it was going to be like, I can't believe these kids are doing this, blah, 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 blah. And when they came down and saw what we were doing, where we were like scripting out a show, people had characters, we had like storylines, they were kind of taken aback. And I remember the news, like the anchor was kind of like, okay, we gotta frame this differently. These guys, these are actually responsible people trying to like do wrestling shows. This is not what we've been seeing everywhere. So um once that hit, a couple people found other people that were doing backyard shows around us found out about us were able to go to my buddy's house. My buddy, his dad built us a full on 16 by 16 ring in his backyard. Like, just like, not, not a standard ring. I mean, we kind of had to do some guesswork at that time because there weren't a lot of ways to build a ring or know how to build a ring online, but we did have actual ring ropes. I do remember that. So that news thing hit, and then some people from around the area that were other backyarders were reaching out to us, and we're doing shows, and they were older. One of those people was Ricky Shane Page, and so he was a couple of years older than us, and he was starting to train up in Cleveland. And it was like, oh, I didn't realize it was that close. Like, we could go become wrestlers just like 45 minutes down the road. And so then it just was kind of like, okay, let's try this. Let's see if we can do it. And there would be times too where he would come down and he would show us some stuff that he had learned. And by that time we'd been backyarding, all through high school. We've been doing it for 6 years. We started to catch on. And so then, yeah, I started training after doing, backyard wrestling, and thinking it would be just like a fun way to continue to perform. So, and then, yeah, now we've landed kind of here after all those years.
So it was almost just a natural progression in your case. There wasn't, I don't want to say like the line to cross per se, but you just kind of had or always done it in a way, one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, like in high school, we had a group of people that kind of fell out. They weren't as diehard as we were. I would say there was probably three of us that decided to actually go and train to become professional wrestlers. A lot of the guys were doing it as like something for us to hang out, but for a couple of years there, we were like the wrestling group. Like, if you talk like cliques in high school, your jocks and, other different people or whatever, we had a clique as like the wrestling group. We were the guys that like hung out, watched it, talked about it, did shows. And it was just a part of the friend group. And then I guess, as new people came in, and, it was like, new folks were coming in, we were learning about them and where the other, it's like any kind of connection that you're making, whether it's professional in your personal life, there are other opportunities that pop up, and it's like, oh, okay, we can actually like go and get paid for this. We can travel around and do this. Okay, we can do this in front of real crowds. Like, yeah, let's give this a shot. So, yeah, like you said, it was just kind of a natural progression to the next step there.
Well, and you kind of got you can in your area, you kind of got this like kind of a sweet spot of like 2000s independence, because like
Yeah.
AIW was just kind of starting into being a thing.
Yeah.
Heartland was out that our way about
Mhm.
ish, like we'll say driving distance. I'm not good with my Ohio geography, so I don't want to imply like it was right across the street when
Right.
it's the equivalent of like the Quad Cities in Chicago. So, it's close geographically speaking, but it's still a
Right.
2.5 hour drive. But like still, like actually in terms of indies, like that's still pretty darn close. You'd
Yeah.
be back home that night. Um,
Right.
but no, it's the sweet spot. So like that is just overall awesome about it. And no, awkward pause, awkward pause.
Yeah, awkward
Post
pause.
French.
But I was gonna say, what's funny too, and I envy when people, and I tell people this that are like younger, to try to document and write down, journal, whether it's something that was like a funny thing that happened, or something in your match, or write it down and have it documented, because you don't know when you might want to revisit it, or if you're lucky enough to do this for a long time and have a lot of memories, some of those, they get pushed out for other things or other pieces and parts that are in your brain floating around in there. And like just recently, Homicide had his last match, his retirement match. And Joe Dombrowski, who's out of Pittsburgh, but he had a lot to do with, I mean, he's been on MLW too, and he's had a lot to do just the independent scene all over the place. And he'll share stuff because he's really good about, documenting. He's like a historian in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. He shared a screenshot of Homicide on a Cleveland All Pro show, and I don't remember who he was wrestling. He said it in the post, and then he tagged me because he was like, "Oh, also appearing was like Zach Gowen, me, and someone else." And I was like, "I do not remember." I mean, I know I was on a show with Homicide outside of that. There was another one for a place called Hybrid Wrestling. I remember that one, but I was like, I don't remember being on the show with Homicide. How do I not remember like being on there with one of the greats of a generation, and so it's just, that's why I tell people, try and write this stuff down, so you don't forget, because like I said, if you're lucky enough, you'll have a lot of these kind of cool moments of people that, even if you don't wrestle, you're going to be on shows with folks that like you just would not have ever guessed. I have a ton of
Uh,
those.
oh no, that's one of like the little things I love about like the independents is just because you don't know who's going to be there and what stage of their career is going to be. Because like I mean, I put over on the show all the time. My connections with SCW Pro, which is connected to the Black and Brave Wrestling Academy. So like. I have personally insulted who's now the gentleman NXT Tag Team Champion, Nathan Frazier. Like I have told him to stop, close his limey mouth, among other things. Because he's
Yeah.
British and therefore he's limey. But but like this little things like that are like you find out like later on, like someone just came through like for a one off or like secretly trained there, did just like
Yeah.
I don't know road crew, and then like wait a second, I've seen that person before. They didn't have green hair then, but
Yeah.
they made sure I didn't get bowled over when someone dove over the ropes or something like. Um,
Yeah.
but
Well, because
it's
yeah, everybody has a point that they start at, and you don't know, where their journey takes them. And the same thing goes for people that are like nearing the end of their wrestling career. I was just on a show with Ricky Morton, and I hadn't been on a show with him before, but I know, did a lot of independence. We just hadn't crossed paths before. I don't think maybe one other time. And it's always just surreal, right? Because they're like your peer technically, but at the same time too, I'm like, this is one of the greatest tag team wrestlers of all time. And he's talking to me, as like we're old friends. That's the funny thing about the camaraderie that happens in wrestling, where you're just like, somebody pinch me right now? Is this really happening?
well, that's like, and I don't hear any bad stories about Ricky. He's just like everybody's his friend. He just shows up in the locker room. If you got questions, he's got the answers for him. If not, he's got a story for you, one way or
Oh
another.
yeah. Oh
And and he's definitely the old adage of he's forgotten more about professional wrestling than most of us will ever know. And he's
very true.
still out there rocking and
Yep.
rolling, pun intended.
Right.
But yeah, and I was gonna kind of go back to the point of like writing the journal down. Like I think I like Chris Jericho. Jericho has a journal of like all of his matches. Like, and I
Yeah.
think that's fascinating, especially in a sport where you get hit in the head for a living, and or you might have driven legit like 1,000 miles just for a booking because they weren't going to pay your trans and you can't afford airfare. Like
Right.
it's
Yep. Yeah,
but
that's like I said, why I try to not convince, but at least tell people like you should, whatever you want to do, whether it's just writing down the match, the date, the time, and who you wrestled, you know, even that, because I did that for a number of years and kind of gave up in the last couple of years, but even that was fun to go back and look. Like, oh my gosh, I forgot I wrestled that person 18 times in 2014 or whatever it is.
Uh, and it's like things like that are like low key one of the reasons why I've like stopped like going through like cage match when I get people on the show
Mm,
and go like, oh, like you worked so and so. Do you have any good stories of working with them? And like,
yeah.
I
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. The blank stare. Yeah.
yeah, and unfortunately, like usually in my case, like I'm not doing like, oh, you worked with Ric Flair. Like I'm definitely like,
Right.
oh, you worked with Matt Cross, who is a wonderful wrestler, but like he's not as well known as he should be. I'll phrase it like that. Like he should be
Yeah.
everywhere, but I mean he is kind of everywhere, but he's not under the bright lights of everywhere, unfortunately.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I know from McFoley hearing, I think it was on his podcast or somewhere, maybe something that I listened to of his on YouTube, where he said, you'll remember the really great ones and you'll remember the really bad ones, which is very true. Like middle ground is like, we did great. We did an all right job out there. 2 years from now, I'll completely forget about it. But if we really crapped the bed and had a terror, I'm going to remember that one for a long time. And if we did really, really well and maybe it gave me another opportunity for somewhere else or another position in the company, whatever, then I definitely remember that. But yeah, the middle ground stuff is like just kind of goes,
it's another day at the office.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
just a different office.
yeah.
But also things right down though. You should give yourself star ratings or whatnot.
Right.
Um, But I was thinking of like, especially with the journaling stuff, like wrestling is such a creative business as a
Mm.
whole. Like just being able to journal that and just keep it in the back of your head, because you never know when's gonna, like, a good idea like that's gonna pop up. Like you
Mhm.
can use it later as like basis for something. I always think of, well, you bring up McFoley, like the Kane Dewey promo, where like just rando in the crowd one day had a sign that said Kane Dewey, and just like made it, kept it in the
Yep.
back of his head, and then when he had that heel turn, like
Yep.
that, there was the there that was the thing that crossed the line, and
Right.
made Cactus Jack whatever. And but like, we'll kind of poorly segue this
Sure.
into, we'll say, your other wrestling endeavor, like
Yeah.
old wrestling. So like taking all these ideas and just kind of like funneling them that way. Like, what made you kind of like going from
Mhm.
fan to professional, semi-professional wrestler? What made you go from wrestler to found old wrestling?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, and I know, and everybody that's listening to this knows that there's no shortage of independent wrestling. Like wherever you are, unless I don't want to, unless you're like in New Mexico or Montana or Idaho. In that case, I do feel a little sorry for you that there's not an abundance of it. But in a lot of places in the Midwest, in the East Coast, even in the South, maybe the West Coast, I guess to a degree too. There's a lot. There's a lot of wrestling out there, and you're not saying that that's a bad thing. It is a good thing because it gives people opportunities. There's new talent that's being brought up at all times. It's places for people to get their reps in and hone their craft. um and I had always, not always, but I had been toying with the thought of like, okay, what if I ran a show? The first ever independent show that I saw, I think, was maybe around 1990. I think 1994, 95 maybe. And it was in Norwalk, Ohio, which is pretty close to Cedar Point. It's a pretty well-known amusement park if anybody's a fan of roller coasters. But that's where I grew up, and I just remember like watching these guys come to my small town and just thinking like, that's amazing. Like, it was, and at that time these people are larger than life. It's Greg Valentine, it's Brutus Beefcake, the Iron Sheik. um I think Hacksaw Jim Duggan was there, maybe Nikolai Volkov, and they were at my local fairgrounds, and I was just like, man, like this is really cool. And that probably played a part in me wanting to be a professional wrestler. And so I thought, I would like to do a show at that same fairgrounds, because maybe there's some kids out there that maybe they can't afford to go to Cleveland or they can't afford to go to Toledo, but they can afford to go 15 minutes down the road to the fairgrounds and see a show. The only problem that I had is that I didn't want to do another wrestling show. And by that I mean I just didn't want to do, some acronym, whatever it is, Full Throttle Professional Wrestling Association Unlimited, right? I didn't want to do something without a heart and a soul, and also be different. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, it's got to be different than what anyone else is doing. And the person I was dating at the time, we were talking about it, and it was like, okay, you're playing this old timey character right now. I was doing, and I still do to a degree, this kind of like bare knuckle boxing character. I do it in old wrestling still, very much, throwing fisticuffs, pugilist type of John L. Sullivan, because of the mustache and the hair and all that stuff. And so it was like, well, you're an old timey character. And then it was like, we rattled off a few other old timey characters at that time, which would have been Dasher Hatfield, who played an old timey baseball character in Shakara. Big Sue Jackson, who was out of Indiana, is a Billy Rock trainee, same place that Ruby Soho came out of. And then Thunder Kitty, who's probably one of the most well-known female independent wrestlers, I would say, because of her character, right? She was doing a vintage character when, no, I mean, there probably were some others out there. They just didn't get the clout or the recognition that she did. And so we were like, let's do an old time wrestling show. It's gonna be at the fairgrounds. The building looks dusty as hell already. So let's lean into that. Let's lean into the dust and the smell of horses and like the hay bales. And so we did. And we've I thought the 1920s is probably one of the most interesting time periods in American history. Just when you think about, the political system, the Great Depression, sports. It was when Babe Ruth was around, and also, Prohibition was happening with Al Capone, right? And when you think about it, there's all these amazing kind of characters that you can take bits and parts from and make them, wrestling characters. And we've kind of bled into the 30s and 40s a little bit. It's not strictly the 20s, but that was the basis. Let's try to do something. Let me try to promote a show, make it different, and something kind of unique. And that's what I ended with Old Wrestling.
And just a name dropper, Thunder Kitty is actually one of the like breadcrumbs that led me originally to Old Wrestling
Mm.
a number of years ago, because I'm a big Thunder Kitty fan, and she works
Yep.
throughout the Midwest, and so just like
Yep.
I thought like, old timey broad, eh?
Right.
And like no one else is like, one, like at the time, like women's wrestling wasn't that popular to begin with, but
Yeah.
like two, like even then, like I didn't like most women wrestlers weren't like character wise being a throwback, and
Yep.
she had everything to go along with it, like the robe, like the old the old obviously the like swimsuit wrestling
Yep.
attire style, coming out to Patsy Cline, all that good stuff. And like, so like in the middling days of social media, like see where like she's going up next, and like, oh, and then like, oh, there's a whole promotion of things kind of like her. And
Right.
also I'm a fan of, like, we just named off Chikara. Like I'm a fan of like places like Chikara that have their own like micro bubble, like
Yeah.
that they like they may acknowledge where people have been prior, but like they've got their own special continuity with its own special rules of how the
Yeah.
reality works. Whether in the case of Shikara, it's your time travelers and your various animals running around, or say like Lucha Underground, where we we got a dragon. Well, I guess we got some of the same things. We got a dragon running around. We got guys flying through space, etc.,
Yep.
etc. And like old kind of like, well, that's kind of nifty. To keep my eye on it. And then unfortunately, though, thanks to technology not being what it was, like I couldn't do a super great job about that till 10 years later or whatnot. Thanks
Right.
to thanks to the rebel, IWTV and just in
Yep.
YouTube. And like now I don't have to leave the house to watch
Yeah.
almost any wrestling I want.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
but so putting over old wrestling, like I just love the concept of it, and just the fact that it's still, you're still plugging along with it. I have to ask though, so like, do you get any, like, you bring in talent, and obviously they kind of get a reinvention coming into
Yeah.
old wrestling in some way, shape, or form, whether it's some folks are drastic, some not so much. Thunder Kitty was pretty much unchanged. But
Yep.
like, do you ever get like a pushback with folk, or do they just like, hey, I'm getting booked for old wrestling, I'm just going to go ahead and
Right.
do insert what character they want?
Yeah, I don't think I've gotten much pushback, thankfully. I think folks that haven't done the show will see how much fun maybe someone that they know, has had doing it, and then I think they put a lot of trust into me as well, to be like, okay, Justin's got this, like he's been doing this a while. We've been on shows with him, or we know about him. We feel like he knows the vision. Now, but I'm always collaborating. I mean, sometimes we'll have ideas for folks. I mean, this is something funny. I say we as if there's some committee or some board of directors at Old Wrestling. It's me. I try to almost make it seem like I'm not the one literally doing all these things, but at the end of the day, I am the person doing a lot of these things. But yeah, usually what happens is, I still have a list of ideas of characters that we have still yet to do. And it typically comes down to me finding that person, whether I'm on a show with them and I'm like, oh, okay, this person is going to be great for this character. But then there are other people that have, come at, come to me and said, "Oh, I have this idea for a character," and then I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yes, let's do that." And so it's always been a little bit of collaboration in different ways, whether I've already got the idea for them or they're presenting me with something. Because there's been a few of those examples over the years, and some people I've tried to take their character and turn them back into the 20s, and then other ones have just been completely new, completely different than what they normally do. I mean, somebody like Vincent Nothing, who's been well known in Cleveland for a long time, as this like essentially like shooter and like MMA type fighter who's going to just ground and pound you. And in Olde Wrestling, he plays Vinny Mandelbaum, which is like a nod to Jerry Seinfeld, the Mandelbaum family, from a couple episodes in Seinfeld, where he's like this old trainer that's trying to get Jerry in shape. And so his last name is a callback to a Seinfeld episode, but he's basically like Mickey from Rocky, so it's completely different. Or like, Ricky, from being a deathmatch wrestler and like, being, so versatile, and then being a Southern judge wearing like essentially being Boss Hog, like it's been just so much fun for me, but also like all the people, like the amount of fun that they're able to have in these characters, and so many people are playing them naturally, as if you would thought like, oh yeah, this is their normal wrestling character that they always do. So I get a real kick out of that.
Yeah, and so this, I love, again, you brought up Ricky Champage, and there's
Mm.
he's most people think of him as deathmatch work and whatever, but like for a bit, like he was like the shining beacon of like everything I felt was like right with old wrestling, just because like just a total 180. And then he also like really showed his versatility that either people ignore or doesn't really demonstrate as a worker, because he's a lot better worker than people really give him credit for, which I blame the deathmatch stuff for. But he was also like had a match in a wheelchair and pulled it off successfully. Like,
He did. Yeah, we ended up doing two wheelchair matches, one with me and then one with Matt Cross. And if you go back to Ricky's interview with Stone Cold, the match with Ricky and I, when he's in the wheelchair, Stone Cold watched that match. So like Stone Cold said my name, watched a match of mine. The only match that I know that Steve Austin, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, he watched me wrestle Ricky in a wheelchair. So like, how crazy is that? And they talked about it. But like you said, it goes to his versatility. I mean, I don't know who, as far as I know, I don't think I've seen anyone else do a whole match in a wheelchair. Maybe we'll see that sometime down the road. But yeah, speaks to his versatility and his ability for sure.
and kind of indirectly piggyback on this, and I know this is a question that's almost the equivalent of like choosing your firstborn, but like,
Mm.
what is your what is your kind of like favorite character transformation or like use of a character, if you're willing to give me a favorite?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to pick Ricky because of how ridiculous Judge Hugo is. I mean, he's wearing all white. He's thrown shoes before. Just his mannerisms are just absolutely absurd. I try not to break. Sometimes I try not to break kayfabe completely. There's a guy named the Cruncher that's really good. He's a masked wrestler. I mean, anyone will know if they Google it, but I like to still at least keep up appearances a little bit. He's different than his normal character for sure. Same thing for a guy named Buster Buckaroo. He's kind of our Lone Ranger type character. Those are a few that come to mind. Let me think here. Well, this is just a one-off that we did. The one time that I booked Tracy Smothers, when we booked him against a bear, and it
I was
was
gonna bring
R.D. Evans. Yeah, it was Robert Evans dressed as a bear, and so I told him at that point. I think this is right before he was hired at WWE, and he had pretty much kind of stopped wrestling. I think maybe he had one match a year before that, and I was like, and I had known Robert for a while, and I was like, Robert, I have this idea, and I think it's got to be you. And so he did it. He was willing to do it, and he played a bear about as great as anyone could play.
oh no, It's one of those things. Like I'm a huge Tracy Smothers mark, and
Mhm.
just like again, and like it's one of those things. Is like now that I have all this wrestling streaming in front of me, I just once in a blue moon just go like, who's someone fun Tracy could have
Yeah.
wrestled, and then like
Mm,
and then like a bear.
right.
And I made it a point because the bear was highlighted, which means it was a link. I
Yep,
made sure that I didn't click on the link, so I had no clue. No. I knew the bear wasn't a
yep,
real bear,
right,
but I
yep.
didn't know what it was. But I'm like, okay, I got IWTV. We were gonna watch ourselves some Tracy Smothers at Wrestle a Bear, and the wife like half rolled her eyes because like she tolerates my Tracy love to begin with.
Right.
Like she hasn't seen some of his good stuff before the age of like 35.
Okay, yep,
In his prime. We
just a
just
camp.
we just see where his where he's just doing dance contests and
Right.
running his mouth the entire time,
Oh, I love it.
which personally I still love, and I still threaten ultra mega mass homicide, or like I'm not even an athlete, and I will like reference people throwing closed fists, pulling my
Right.
tights, pulling my hair, poking my eyes. Ref, come on. But diatribes aside, but yeah, so like I made it like, well, yeah, oh, and it's old wrestling, that's even better too. Um, but and then finding out like the big reveal of Robert Evans, the
Mhm.
imperialist
The
Robert
Imperialist, yep,
is
the
on top
Imperialist,
of it
Robert
too.
Evans.
Like it just got progressively more ridiculous, and I loved every moment of it. Um, but go so but again, with the love of Tracy Smothers, I have to ask, like, yeah, how how was Tracy to work with?
Mhm.
I mean, he's game for about anything, but like,
Yeah,
what was it like being able to bring him in and then go because he wrestled real bears back, back
yeah,
in like 83, 84. So he's
yep.
already got history doing this. Like, how did like the pitch and like how eager was he to do this?
He was all about it, I mean, luckily, Tracy and I have known each other for quite a while. I mean, he I interacted with him. We did like a run I did like a run-in spot with him maybe the first year or 2 at a show in Cleveland, and we just had always seen each other on shows in Cleveland and around, and so it's always beneficial, I feel like, with these guys that have, been around, and like we were talking about earlier, if you're not in front of them a couple times, they're going to forget, if they don't have a memorable moment with you. So like, I built up a rapport with Tracy and over the years, and he's always been such a nice guy and just a genuine like help to the locker room and help to any show. And I kind of posed the idea to him, and it was, kind of like, what, really? This is what, okay. And I remember we cut a promo one time at AIW before the show where I got my buddy's bearskin rug, and he was like cutting a promo with this bearskin rug that he's not afraid of any bear and he's skin you. And we had to do a couple takes because I was like, Tracy, you can reference that you've wrestled bears, but like you can't say 1989 was the last time you wrestled a bear. I was like, you got to say just like 89, assuming people would think it's 1889. So I remember we had to do a couple takes because I was like, Tracy, it's like we're the I had to describe like the time period is way back in the day. So like 1989 hasn't happened yet. So you have to be in, the 1800s. But um when he was there and he saw the show, I mean, I think the highest compliment that anyone could have or has given old wrestling was from him. And he said, he was like, Justin, he's like, you can take this on the road. He was like, you could do this. You could take it on the road. You could take it across America, like doing something like this. And that meant a heck of a lot to hear from someone who did this as a profession, who had toured the world, pretty much seen it all, right? And in his later years was able to say, what you've got here could be something that could bring joy to people everywhere. Now, it would bring a lot of stress to me to try and pull that off, but just knowing that from somebody that I put in very high regard in wrestling meant a whole lot. It still means a whole lot to me that he would say something like that. And we're trying to do that, not to a crazy extent, but I'm like, we were talking off air. You mentioned one of the promotions out by you tries to focus on small towns and festivals and fairs, and I've started to do that a little bit with old wrestling because I've found that I love being in big cities. We get great reception in Detroit and Cleveland and these other places that we've been to. And I'm just like, well, I think this also appeals to like, smaller towns and communities too. Like, let's try some places that people might not even think about doing a show or bringing it to town, but these people, they're looking for entertainment just like anybody else is. So yeah, it was in general with Tracy. I mean, I wish I could have worked with him more. Just he's gone too soon. But that I'm glad we got to do him in the Bear that one time. That was that was special.
So,
Yeah.
love it. I love Tracy, and he's given literally gave everything for wrestling. Even like as he got older, and he knew he couldn't do the stuff he couldn't do at
Yeah.
20. Like he still gave back and would cut promos and work with the up and coming talent, and like hear all the stories backstage of like how he would watch every single match
Yeah.
and basically not necessarily fully agent it, but like either heap praise, or if you came for advice,
Yeah.
he would give you like what he may have done different. And
Yeah.
for better or for worse, there'll never be another Tracy Smothers.
No,
But
there won't. No way. And
but like I said, but like that was like the whole bear thing was great, and I was thoroughly. It may not have been everybody's cup of tea, but it's totally my cup of tea.
there we go. Yeah.
Um, but I do kind of want to push things, since we've been talking for like 40 minutes or so. Kind of push things like we'll say more recently, because you have a couple of
Yeah.
events coming up, and I do have a question. And if you don't want to, and this is another one of those, if you don't want to get
Yep.
like, if you want to play it a little bit closer to the chest, that's fine. Fine.
No
But
problem.
you're advertising a wrestling like murder mystery event,
Yeah.
and it's in June. You got at
Yep.
least one more event prior to that. But
Yep.
I am. You have my attention with
Yeah.
that. I have not heard of a proper murder mystery wrestling event. Like
Yeah.
how did, like, at least how did that come about? And if you don't want to give away the details, that's fine. But at least want to hear like the whys of it, if nothing
Yeah.
else.
Well, I feel like a lot of things in life, sometimes they're just really happy accidents, right? They just fall into place. So we work with Beachland Ballroom, amazing venue in Cleveland, incredible staff too. It's the place that I had my first professional wrestling match at, December. I don't remember the day. This is why I got to write that stuff down. December, maybe like 3rd, 2020, 2002. And so there was maybe one AIW show, maybe two AIW shows there around 2004, 2003, somewhere around there. There hadn't been wrestling since then. It's not the biggest room, but it's a great room for old wrestling. We pack them in there, and we've been doing shows there for the past this will be the 4th year that we've done it. And they book a lot of bands. It's a concert venue traditionally, but they have comedians there. They've done film screenings. It's a very community, like it's a stalwart of the east side of Cleveland, I would say. It's been there since 2000. Just amazing space. And when the time came up for us to find a date, it was like, okay, when will this work in your schedule? And I was like, well, let's try something. Let's go around May, June area. And we found a Friday, and it was like, okay, June 13th on a Friday. I was like, yep, that sounds great. I don't have anything else on that date. Let's do it. And I realized, I was like, okay, that's a Friday the 13th. What are we gonna? I can't do. You can't just do a Friday the 13th show without having some kind of like theme about it. That's how my brain operates. Not only do I have to like run a wrestling show, now I have to think, well, I need a little bit something more to it. So that's how it came about. And essentially what's going to happen is a wrestler is going to be murdered. And we're going to try and find out who has murdered the wrestler by the end of the night. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think people are really excited and intrigued already by like how it's going to, how it's going to play out, how we're going to do it. But we're going to have fan interaction, right? We're going to allow fans to like guess. We'll probably give clues throughout the night as to like, okay, is this an actual clue, or is this maybe just circumstantial? Is this misleading? And I think probably what we'll do, I haven't fleshed out every detail, but most likely, a couple of the people that do correctly guess, will give them like old wrestling merchandise and things like that as a way, just like here's your kind of like door prize type of thing. So I'm really excited for it. Cleveland is like a second home to Olde Wrestling, and I mean it's where I came up. So I always love going back to Cleveland and doing shows there. It's just a great space, great energy.
Yeah, Cleveland's got wrestling history, and I was going to ask if you're going to go like full like dinner,
Oh,
murder mystery, like murder
right.
mystery dinner theater with it, and let people figure out who the murderer is by the end of the show or something of the like, because I mean that's the first thing I would think of if there's like a wrestling done it and it's
Right.
live, like just
Yeah.
even if it's a cheap way to make some money, like $5, make your guess.
Right,
Or something
exactly.
like.
Yeah, here you go. Yeah. We'll give you a second guess for $5. The first guess is free. If you want a
Yeah,
second one, we'll give you, throw
there we go.
$5 in there if you want. Suggested donation. I mean, I'm gonna have to start looking for probably, I'm gonna have to buy some pencils in bulk so that everybody's
Oh
got a
yeah,
chance to fill out some. I haven't bought bulk pencils in quite a while, so
I haven't thought about that part of it yet. Like, oh no,
right.
glad to
Well,
be a reminder of the office equipment that you may need if you're going to allow people
exactly.
to.
You gotta be creative here, and then you gotta have logistics on the other side over here. It's gotta be a 50-50 split. But I mean, the other thing too is that like I'm such a huge fan of Clue, the board game. I just always have been. We did an old wrestling version of Clue. I mean, maybe I'll bring it back, but we made it a couple years ago, just a limited run because it was pretty expensive to manufacture and like get made. But it was a custom board table where we had scenes from the fairgrounds made as like settings for it. And I mean, I'll be the first to admit we lifted Clue. We called it Who Done It, but like it's our version of Clue.
I mean, copyright laws are really surprisingly easy to get around,
There you go.
and
Right.
and there are a batch of clues that are legit. That like, well, I'm not even sure if Clue is the original. They might like I'm trying to remember which came first, whether Clue or Cluedo came
Right.
first.
Right.
And or sometimes things just change because of who owns it at the moment. I mean, Monopoly was the landlord's game back in
Right.
1962 or whatnot. um
Right.
Shout out to Macomb, Illinois on that one. um but no, but that's again like really to put over old wrestling. This is just kind of like the like something different off the wall stuff that I think that really like any entertainment needs. But like this one thing I love about professional wrestling because I compare it to a circus. So like, yeah, if you want British catch style, you can go find yourself some British catch style. If you want to see people hit each other with light tubes, that is readily available too.
Yeah.
And thanks to old wrestling, if we want to reimagine the current setting into the 1920s,
Right.
we now have that. And like, I think you're pulling it off, wonderfully, which
Oh,
is,
thank you, Rob.
which is self-indulgently why why have you on the show. Not gonna lie, like this podcast audience of one, baby. And if I can get the people on that make the things that entertain me, I'm gonna pull that
Worthwhile.
gonna
Yeah.
write that email out and send it out
Exactly.
that way. Or in the case of old wrestling, telegram, because
There you
that's
go.
what we
Yeah, we
do.
did. Yeah,
we
electronic
did, we
mail is not
did.
It took a week or two to hear back from me.
um but so that's June. We'll kind of wind things down. So what's coming down the pipeline of where we could see old wrestling in the near future? I know you have a show this coming month in April.
We've got a show coming up here in April out in a really small town out kind of towards Dayton. I mean, Dayton's another place. I mean, Ohio in general has a lot of great wrestling history, and I could go. I mean, I could come back and talk about Ohio wrestling history, but Dayton, it's where a place called Rockstar Pro ran weekly for a long time. Had a great fan base there. Wrestling Revolver does shows in Dayton about every other month or so, somewhere around there. Some other local promotions that run pretty frequently. Some of those I'll wrestle for. And so I thought, this would be a nice opportunity to do a show out here in an area that's known for it. We hadn't done anything in Central Ohio before. We've done Central Indiana in Muncie for a number of years, but we haven't done like Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati. And the nice thing about this area is that it's pretty much about an hour from Columbus, about an hour from Cincinnati, 30 minutes from Dayton. So and maybe 2.5 hours from Toledo, 2 hours from Indianapolis. So a lot of wrestling hubs where there are fan bases, and people travel. So it's a really cool little town in Ohio. There's a great small college, and theater is where we're going to be doing it. It was an old foundry warehouse that they turned into a theater. And so that's one of the other things about old wrestling, where I try to look for venues that, if they're not period appropriate per se, they look like they could have been, right? Like Beachland looked like it was a building from 100 years ago, or the fairgrounds looks like it. This theater looks like that as well, and it'll be on Friday, April 11th. We're gonna have Ragtime Rick there. We didn't talk about Ragtime Rick, but we have live music at not every show, but most of the marquee shows. I'll try to bring Ragtime Rick in. And so I remember one of the other things about being different, right, was like, okay, if there was wrestling in the 20s like this, and people did have entrance music, how would that have been? How would that have worked, right? Well, we wouldn't have really had, I mean, they could have maybe put a record player up to like some speaker back then, but like amplification wasn't even a thing until like the 50s, really, like for outdoor spaces, like at a big area or whatever, somewhere around there. So I was like, okay, we probably would have a live band. And I was like, okay, what music would have been popular? Would have been ragtime. So I remember talking to Rick, who's a really well-known musician in Toledo, and they've been with us since the very first show. They've done every show in Norwalk. They're going to do this show here in April down in Yellow Springs, and that's one of the things that people, both the fans and wrestlers alike, are just like, I can't believe you had a live band. Because guys will be like, okay, hey, what kind of music do I need to send you? I'm like, you don't need to send me anything. You're gonna have a band play off. So they're like, what? You're gonna have a band play me off? So yeah, they'll be there. They're a hoot. They're great, and they just kind of add to the atmosphere. And, and it's all to say that, like, I wanted to. One of the other goals about this was, I'd like for wrestling to appeal to people that aren't just wrestling fans. I love that community. I appreciate that community. But if I can open up the doors to show that wrestling is this performance art that like theater people would appreciate, people that are stand-up comedy fans would appreciate, if I can bring those people in and show them that wrestling, what it can be, and maybe make fans out of them and grow the community, or at the very least respect what we do, that to me is like a huge goal and a huge importance, and why I'm still doing this, to be like, it is a performance art. It's different than any other type of it, but like, we are theater in our own way. And I just want to kind of get that appreciation and recognition from folks that might not view it until they see what old wrestling is about.
Old-timey multimedia presentation is
Exactly right.
what you
Yeah,
got going on now. It's a whole hootenanny.
exactly. Yeah, bring a film reel, and yeah.
And it slipped my mind because I've been terrible about these things and not have looked at
Yeah.
like my notes pretty much like since like the introduction phase. I have to ask real quick before
Yeah.
I turn you loose and like have you do the plugs of where we can find you online.
Yeah.
But former President Taft, like how big of a get was he? Like that one blew my mind. Like special guest William Howard Taft, former President of the United
Right.
States, current Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Right.
As
Current Justice of the Supreme Court, and also appointed U.S. Secretary of Slams. He's the first ever U.S. Secretary of Slams. And so he's presiding over the old wrestling events, just making sure everything's, run well down the middle, very respectful. It wasn't easy getting Mr. Taft. I mean, luckily he's an Ohioan. He's from Cincinnati. So we had that, in our back pocket of a local promotion. But I don't think the Secret Service has been invented yet. So I think it was a little bit easier to get through his channels. You just had to send maybe a telegraph to his residence, and he was game. And he's actually wrestled once, maybe just once, just one time we had him wrestle. He's an old buddy of mine, and it's just fun to be able to kind of like still hang out with some of your friends that you have known forever. I mean, some of my oldest friends were still doing this with old wrestling, even if it's not in the ring or in front of the camera, but they're participating in some form or fashion. So it's just a great example to hang out with my buddies. And I'm glad to say Taft is now one of my closest friends.
That is awesome. No, I'm a huge president nerd, and
Oh, okay.
love all of like the stupid little facts, and whether
Yep.
like of various degrees of accuracy, especially in the case of Taft and the alleged
Mm,
bathtub incident,
yes. Yep.
amongst other things.
Yep.
Um, though, like my favorite like joke is that they invented the Secret Service to protect us from Andrew Jackson, even though that one's a total fabrication in my head, just because of the story of him like nearly beating would be assassin to death. Like he had to be dragged away from the
Oh, I have heard of
assassin
that. Yes, I have heard of that.
because the
Yep.
gun jammed twice. And
Okay.
then that was enough time for like 80-year-old Andrew Jackson to come upon him with a cane, and he beat him so severely like that, and he wasn't done yet. They had to drag like this the
Oh my
president
God.
away from beating the assassin to death, and that's like one of my favorite president stories in general. And then I just added the
Oh,
fabrication of that's why we have the Secret Service, not to protect the president, but to protect
yeah.
us from Andrew Jackson, lest he take offense to
Wow.
us, attempting to
Oh,
mortally wound him.
I love it. I
Um,
haven't heard that. I did just recently buy from a book fair. I did get Ulysses S. Grant biography, so I'm excited to read that one.
Oh, he's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now we're going off into La La
I
Land,
know. I was going to say, yeah.
but Galena, Illinois is like maybe 2 hours, depending on where I'm starting the
Okay.
party at. And that was his like that was home for him
Oh, okay.
at the end towards the end of his life.
Okay.
So we got like the Grant Museum, his old house, and then of course the rest of the tourism industry, because Galena has like a rich mining history. And trading history as well, because it was at one point like a major mining port along the Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
So it's one of those like touristy historical towns.
Yeah.
So like their downtown district is all they've done what they can to kind of make sure like a lot of the buildings like have retained their historical significance, at
Oh,
least
that's
visually.
okay. I'll have to check that out. Okay, that's very cool.
But yeah, but there's also Grant's house, and it's I want to say it's owned by like the historical society. So there's like some stuff like other stuff that wasn't Grant's in it, but like they've like kept it like
Mm.
pretty at least realistic, if not like nearly the same as when Grant was in it. And then have like a whole like they had like a hologram presentation of like Grant, like
Yeah.
not necessarily narrating chunks of his life, but like they would have like a documentary, and then like a hologram Grant would like come out to do like a little bit like in between, or like give
Right.
it some like little like give a little bit more humanity, rather than just like guy
Right.
reading a book about like
Yep.
whatever. So, like maybe come in and make a joke about it, or just be like, the times were tough back then, blah 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 blah, and do whatever.
Oh,
But yeah, so but like, oh yeah, all that stuff is my wheelhouse. And like I popped so hard because again, like when I caught that one event, like I
yep.
no spoiler. Well, the only spoiler was that I knew Tracy Smothers beat the bear. That was my
Yep.
only
Yep.
spoiler of the event. I didn't see who beat who else was wrestling. That was probably the show. And then seeing William Howard Taft show up just
Yep.
further blew my mind. And then, spoiler alert, he does get at some point later on the show, gets physically
He
involved
does. Yep.
with the imperialist Robert Evans. It wasn't a full match, but like I think I threw that on Twitter somewhere. I screen capped it, and like it's on the internet of Taft finally having enough of Evans and his big mouth and
Right.
taking it down. But I suppose before we go completely off the rails
Yeah.
again,
Grand
um,
President, yeah.
where can we find you online, and where can we funnel new fans to old wrestling and yourself?
Yeah. Anything Marion Fontaine is semi-pro wrestler. I think that would be Instagram and Twitter, and it might not be Facebook. It might be Marion Fontaine. But I'm most active on it on Instagram. And anything with old wrestling is at old wrestling. I'm trying to put a lot of stuff up on YouTube more consistently. We've got some like half-hour shows I'm trying to get added here to YouTube pretty quick. Just put up one with Ruby Soho when she This is after she was released from WWE and was active. Well, this is when she was active in AEW, still is, but I can't remember what the year was. Because she had wrestled at Olde Wrestling years before. So just put that one up. She plays a great character, like Rosie the Riveter. Fantastic. So trying to get more of that out there is just a reminder of some of the well-known people that have, gone through Olde Wrestling over the years, whether it was early in their career or while they're, at the height of it. There's a bunch. RJ City, Dalton Castle. There's a ton of them. Fun ones to check out. So that's Olde Wrestling. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the same. It's Olde Wrestling with an E. So OLDE Wrestling. Pretty easy, I would like to think. So thankfully nobody had that before. And yeah, just we're promoting the 2 shows coming up, April 11th in Yellow Springs, Dayton area, and then Friday the 13th in June in Cleveland, Ohio. Then the end of the summer is our extravaganza. It's our biggest show of the year. That's end of August, the 24th. And I'm sure we'll have some shows there in between. So just kind of, follow along, check us out. Like I said, we're trying to do shows kind of all over Ohio. So if there are any people that are like Pittsburgh, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, we're going to probably be in each corner of the state of Ohio. So just kind of wait and, watch out for show announcements and, try and come out to a show if you can.
Sounds great. Marion, thank you for coming on the show and talking Olde Wrestling and just, in my case, just generally nerding out and tolerating me. It's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me, Rob. This is great. Anytime, I'd love to come back and maybe we do a President's podcast next.
There we go. We'll just go through. I'll reference in like WWE. Was it 2K yet? Maybe it was a 2K yet. But like I have like a roster of presidents, create a wrestler that I was like, working on. And I never finished before like the next game came out.
Love that.
See if my ratings were accurate in your humble opinion.
Amazing. I need to see that.
The Confusion Wrestling Podcast is a weekly podcast that is written and performed by Rob Kammer and hosted by Spotify for podcasters. The background music for this section is Ruined by Day, performed by Alan Schroeder. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to help support, please like, subscribe, and tell your friends, family, and enemies. Leaving a review is helpful as well, because word-of-mouth advertisement is very important for us small podcasts. My social media links can be found in the description, but Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky are at The Nova of Cass. That's TheNovaOfCass, and Facebook is MLW Confusion, all one word. If you'd like to support monetarily and help upgrade my equipment, please check out my virtual tip jar at ko-fi.com/Casanova, or if you prefer more bang for your buck, go to patreon.com/Casanova, that's CASSONOVA, where for as little as $2, backers get access to the podcast early and without those pesky ads, plus other exclusive content. So join the crew that is headed up by Keith Wynn, Alan Schroeder, Chris Zach, and Elenia, and check it out. You can also find t-shirts, coffee mugs, and other merch at the Confusion Podcast store on Teespring. Also, be sure to check out the affiliate links in the description below. For business inquiries such as ads, sponsorships, and etc., please email rzkamer, Kamerer, at comcast.net. Thank you all for listening.